We use these terms interchangeably, but I wanted to talk about, we'll just call them the elite. Do you believe the elite right now are trying to discredit Trump from everything that we've been seeing, from the Russian hacking, from this 35-page dossier that was released? What's your view on what is going on now in the intel agencies, the Trump presidency? What do you think they're trying to do here?
That's a great question. I think in a lot of ways, what we're seeing here is an internal war within the establishment. You're seeing popular sovereignty versus globalism kind of unfolding, and a lot of it's happening behind closed doors. But I think a lot of it's seeping forward because you need support from the populace. So yes, there is a discrediting movement, I guess, if you will. And then there's also, trying to recover and trying to make everything square. Ultimately, though, I think what we're seeing here, well, we see that too. Also, by the way, we see like Assange coming out and saying, in regard to the hacks, it definitely 1000% wasn't the Russians. And then you see people trying to rely on the credibility, quote unquote, of like the CIA saying it was definitely the Russians, and misdirection. Because ultimately what we're seeing here is that, in regard to the hacking, what was the big thing? Well, we discovered that laws were broken. But it's about the Russians. Did they hack? Did they not hack? It's misdirection all the way across the board in a lot of ways. And you've got the globalists who are desperately trying to hold on to power. You've got those who are about popular sovereignty trying to take over. And that internal struggle, I think, is basically what's coming out. So, the left, the elite, are doing everything that they can to try and smear those that are taking their power. And there's a lot at stake, ultimately. So,
do you think Trump is an insider or outsider? Where do you think he stands?
That's hard to say. It's funny because a lot of people like to speculate on that. If you look at some of who he's choosing, there are people who, you could say, wait a second, you're talking about Goldman Sachs. Why is he involved with that? But, or military industrial complex, but ultimately speaking, these people also have histories of trying to get away from that globalist agenda. So, it's hard to say. Yes, when you're at that high level and you're talking about that kind of money, you're going to see a lot of interaction. A lot of the old joke of the attorneys, in the courtroom, they're battling it out, but afterwards they're going to have a beer or whatever. You're going to have elements of that. And I think a lot of people, especially highly principled people, don't understand that game. But it also makes it very hard to, I think, understand the motives and direction of where somebody's going to go with that. I think ultimately we are going to see it play out. I think that's probably the cool part of the position that we're in, is because there are so many question marks at this point. It's also very scary because what are the intentions? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? However, I see a lot of positive in the idea that the establishment from both the left and the right are very much afraid of what Trump's doing, the approach that he's taking. So to me, that lends well to the idea that he's very much outside of the quote unquote establishment. Once again, it could be a part of the game, but Occam's razor, all things being equal, the simplest answer is probably the right one. They wouldn't be afraid and wouldn't be trying to smear him if he wasn't an opposition to them.
Do you think the establishment, do you think they're finished with him? Do you think, okay, we had this 35-page dossier, Trump came out saying it's completely fake news. We know it was on the 4chan message boards. Someone admitted, yes, it was completely made up. And, there's a lot pointing to that it's completely fake. Do you think this is it? Do you think, okay, we're done, we tried, and we're finished with him, and we're not going to try anything else? We're just going to let him ride?
Well, I doubt they're going to just let him ride. I think they're going to continue to try and smear and hurt. And ultimately, here's the thing. There's nothing anybody can do at this point. He's going to be president, right? It's said and done. It's happening. It's going to happen. But yet we still see these smear campaigns, the idea of trying to discredit them. What I think everybody needs to realize is that in 2 years, the globalists, the liberal agenda, I guess, will have another opportunity. So if they spend the next 2 years making this popular sovereignty idea look terrible, they're going to have another option. So they're thinking long term right now. They have to be. Anybody in their right mind who had all of their power basically stripped from them would be. But the establishment on the Republicans, McCain, for instance, he's going to be doing everything that he can to be trying to try and help this along, because ultimately the establishment wants their power back. So if it's 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, you got to think strategically now. Smear campaigns are only going to be a part of it.
The last time you were on, we talked about problems that we face where the founding fathers, they faced the same problems. Do you still feel that we're facing the same exact problems, or do you think that is like clearing up now and we're not really facing those problems anymore?
No, I don't think it's clearing up at all. In fact, if you look at it objectively and really try to, clearly you're not going to have, A equals A kind of a situation, because you're talking about over 200 years separation. But the establishment, the power establishment is losing power, losing credibility. We're on the cusp of war. We've got economic strife. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're looking at back then, too. The establishment, the king, the power structure was losing credibility and on its way out. And this new power structure and this new idea and this new direction was on its way in, on the cusp of economic strife, on the cusp of war. You're talking about rights, individual rights, liberties. All these things are still very much up in the air. I think the rub is very similar to back then. And I think that's something that people really need to be paying attention to. There's a lot of things economically, politically, globally, that are affecting everything that we do. Unfortunately, a lot of it's not being reported on because we've got scandals to talk about and Kim Kardashian or whatever, So, very much so. I think the problems are significant and they're increasing by the day.
You mentioned economic problems. I mean, Obama's leaving office right now. He gave one of the longest speeches, I think, with the last three presidents combined. And we're seeing that all of a sudden the economy just kicked into high gear. I mean, we know a lot of the numbers are manipulated. We know unemployment, GDP, that stuff is completely manipulated, and they're trying to convince everyone that the economy is doing well. When you look at the economy and you look at what's going on here in the U.S. and we see the stock market continually moving up, do you really think that the economy is doing as well as Obama has said it is done?
Absolutely not. And here's the funny thing. If you look at for instance, the stock market compared to inflation, if we were actually growing, we were doing something right, and we were following the inflation, we'd actually be about 26,000, not under 20. And that's basically, that's simple stuff. You look at, for instance, in the grand scheme of things, 50% of the population make under 25,000. They don't have savings. 40% of young people in 2015 were living with their families. Average unemployment right now is 0.3%, something like that, real unemployment. Not looking at the false U3, which, by the way, I would just venture to tell everybody, don't ever look at the U3. That is a ridiculous number. If you're going to look at the U3, you might as well look at the U1. Let's see here. What was some of the other things? One of the coolest statistics, I don't want to call it cool, it's unfortunate, but I think one of the most telling statistics that I've seen here recently was that nearly all of the jobs created between 2005 and 2015 were not traditional 9-to-5 jobs. They were temporary employment. What was it? 52% of millennials feel that their student loan debt has prevented or will prevent them from fulfilling their financial goals. 84% of would-be first-time millennial home buyers say that they aren't able to make a purchase of a home because they can't make a down payment. Housing's the worst it's been in 5 decades. Yeah, we're seeing some movement. We're seeing some interesting things. We're seeing 1,000 jobs created here. 100 jobs created here. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is a decimated situation. People are excited, but this is all on projection. None of the policies, none of these things have actually happened. So nobody really knows how this is going to fare out, if Trump is going to be able to actually make a difference in regard to, or I should say, in competition with Congress, establishment Republicans, establishment Democrats. There's still a lot that they can do to mess things up. So, yeah, everybody's excited, cool, awesome. If Trump can somehow eliminate some of this or a lot of the regulation, yeah, we'll see some growth. But there's a whole slew of ifs that we just really can't contend with. I mean, we don't know the answers to.
As Trump comes into office now, and we're talking about the economy, and the stock market continually moves up, do you see any type of market correction coming?
Have to, absolutely. We're in the second longest running bull market in U.S. history. Absolutely. What goes up must come down. There has yet to be a stock market rise that hasn't had some sort of correction. Absolutely. There are so many different reasons why we can see a correction on the horizon. Now, the question we should be asking isn't necessarily if there's going to be one. That's like saying, will there ever be a war again? Absolutely, there will be. What we have to start asking is when and how. And not only how, but how long. These are some of the more trying questions. How long will this correction last? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I do believe that it's going to be substantial when it hits because of all of the manipulation. I think some of the truths, I think, will surface. I think some of it's going to be forced out into public eye, and that will, because ultimately that'll help the agenda for the Trump administration. But I think ultimately that's going to reveal truths within the economy that will eliminate some of the belief in the economy, and I think that's going to shift for people. So we turn into a savings model, for instance, start being more fiscally responsible. That's going to be detrimental to this debt-based economy that we live in. So
when you said some truths that are coming out about the economy, you mean people learning about what the economy is really doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. What the economy is, I mean, for instance, you talk about a 103% debt to asset ratio in regard to millennials. That's a scary number. That's a scary situation. You look at savings, you look at inflation. I think when people start to see like all these rate hikes, everybody's excited about the rate hikes. Well, in a normal situation, that would be a good thing. But we're in a situation now where wages haven't kept up. You've got an inflationary mechanism that's going to be forcing people to have less value at the end of every paycheck. So they're going to go to the store, for instance. They're going to be getting less when they go to the store. They're already pinched. We are running out of room. And so, yeah, we're creating some jobs. But the problems are so massive and so systemic that it's going to take a massive overhaul and a massive correction to correct some of these, frankly, I would call them injustices. I think it's horrific what has happened. People talk about the dollar. I don't know. We talked about this. I think we talked about this the last time we were on the show. In 1913, you could buy a suit and a gun for an ounce of gold. Today, you can buy a suit and a gun for an ounce of gold. But the same can't be said as far as the dollar. I mean, that's insanity. And we're not taught to look at things this way. And if we did, we could probably save ourselves a lot of grief. But, and then, of course, true unemployment. But see, here's the other side of it, too. The technological side of everything is being thrust upon us. You look at artificial intelligence, you look at robotics, you look at the displacement of true employment, and how fast this is going to be thrust upon us. You are looking at an economic upheaval defined. The way that the world does business is dramatically changing as we speak. I saw a story last week about a firm in Japan who has replaced their entire staff with artificial intelligence. That's amazing. Yeah, it was insurance industry. But once people realize that, wait a second, this can all happen, and artificial intelligence can take away this job and save the company money and so on and so forth, it'll be integrated like wildfire. This is going to have a dramatic impact on everything. And you look at latest statistics, I've seen that upwards of anywhere from 60 to 80% of the jobs that'll be had in a decade haven't even been invented yet. Of course, this is economic upheaval defined. And what happens during economic upheaval is, of course, eventually the rub globally, and you're talking about conflict. So, absolutely.
Do you think that the establishment, they've been preparing the economy and boosting the economy to bring it down under Trump? You think they're just going to let it go and just let him do whatever he has to do? Or do you think there are some plans? I mean, many people are saying that the economy is going to come down right under Trump. And Trump has been put into office because he's a master of bankruptcies, handling defaults, handling collapses, and he knows what to do. And that's why he's in office right now. Do you think that they're preparing to bring it down under him so he can reset the system? Not saying that it's going to be easy, but he can handle the situation going forward. What are your thoughts on that?
I hope that's true. I hope that's true. However, I would say that if it were true, you'd have a whole heck of a lot more support in Congress. You'd see some of these establishment people who understand what they've set up to that's ultimately going to fail. This Keynesian economic nightmare. You would have a lot more support, but I don't see that. If it's true and that's the whole purpose, then yeah, that's a great idea. I think that by luck, by happenstance, at the very least, it's a benefit to have him there. However, we also have to remember too that a lot of the legislation that's going to be required in this transition is going to come from Congress, a Congress who is very much against Trump. Again, let me just remind everybody. When you're talking about Congress, you're talking about a lot of establishment Democrats and a lot of establishment Republicans who don't like what's happening. They are losing power.
We see that.
Yeah, and so try to remember, you've got a three-part government, and any side can throw a cog in the wheel, or destroy, I guess, the system, not necessarily just bind it up. We have to look at it objectively. We have to be level-headed about it and realize that there is a whole lot at stake. And it's not just here in the States. You're talking about a global environment look at what Obama was trying to do in regard to the Russians. You're throwing out the diplomats and throwing a bunch of people up on the border. I mean, that's A, not responsible. B, why would you do that 2 weeks out from your, that's just insanity. And then, of course, blame the Russians for everything in between. It's just, yeah, I don't know. I would love to believe that was true, that, Trump's a strategic situation. But I think, I don't know. It's a good thought.
I wanted to move on to war, since you mentioned Russia and what Obama has been doing. And we hear talks about the Russian hacking. They're blaming everything on Russia. We have the U.S. with NATO bringing troops into Poland right up to the border of Russia. I think it's the Operation Atlantic Resolve. And they're bringing a lot of tanks, a lot of assets up to that area. Do you think that they are pushing for war right now? Is that their thought process?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and yes, but I think it's also, too, a natural progression for the economic upheaval. I don't know if you're familiar with that model, but I think historically speaking, what we see is the lull, economic upheaval, war, the lull, economic upheaval, war. And right now, if you look at it globally, I mean, we talked about on my program not long ago about, flying the F-22 stealth fighters out of bases in Australia. Well, now we're talking about deploying, attack helicopters in South Korea. You got the USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group heading to the Western Pacific. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning and control aircraft being deployed to Japan. We've got the largest deployment of its kind since '91 going on in Europe right now. You got the 4th Infantry Division, the 10th Combat Aviation Brigade, the 3rd Armored Brigade combat team, rolling with M1A1 tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, artillery, aircraft, and a huge deployment, into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and then, of course, trying to ruffle the feathers, saying, "Hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do this," and it's yeah, absolutely, it's a byproduct.
So, do you think they're trying to box Trump into this war by doing all this right now? I mean, think about, like you said, Obama has just a few weeks left, and the things that he's been doing seem, kind of ridiculous at this point because he's leaving office. I mean, why would he start something with Russia? Why would he expel, the diplomats? He also put the UN Arms Trade Treaty back into the Senate for a vote on December 14th, which is kind of strange because, I mean, he's leaving office. I mean, and last time it didn't go anywhere. I know John Kerry signed it and all, and if it did pass the Senate, he would sign it, and they would say, oh, look, it overrides the Second Amendment. But we did have that false flag or the event in Fort Lauderdale, which is kind of weird also, soon after he placed that into the Senate. I mean, he's doing a lot of strange things in his last couple of days in office with this Russian hacking, where they're saying that Russia did hack the United States, and then there was a story that Russia also hacked the Vermont electrical grid. Then Ontario said, yes, Russia hacked our electrical grid. It looks like they're really setting up for something much, much larger.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as far as the setup, it could be any number of things. My model still shows that Russia and China are on the map as far as coming conflict. Situation with Iran still very much so. The allies of the quote unquote Big Five proxies as well. I think that this is very much a thing of concern. You look at, like, for instance, with China, just the trade war things, the stress involved in that. You've got the economies involved with this economic upheaval that are being hurt, or some that are benefiting from it. This whole thing, this whole ball of wax, if you will, is very much indicative of that model, of that progression, if you will. Now, whether or not Trump is going to or not going to engage remains to be seen. However, if you're having an economic upheaval and a coming war, and you look at who Trump has picked, you have a who's who of who I would want involved on my teams if I was having to deal with that. But again, I don't think that much of what we're seeing can be avoided.
You're saying that the people that he's choosing right now, you believe that he's doing it for a purpose of making sure that we have those individuals that can handle what's coming?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, seriously, if you were sitting with a situation where you were dealing with an economic calamity, and you were dealing with a war, potentially global war, on a massive scale like we haven't seen since World War II, and you look at who he's picked. I mean, these are people. I mean, those aren't bad picks. That's who I would choose. Maybe even some of their friends. Absolutely.
Now that we're in 2017, many people believe that, if we have a war, there won't be an economic collapse. That will take care of the problem. Does war actually take care of the problem with the economy?
No. What we have, all right, that's a great question. But no, under normal circumstances, perhaps. I mean, you look at World War II, in comparison to the Great Depression, yeah, it was a benefit. Ultimately speaking, we were doing a lot of very interesting things. I would say unconstitutional, but yeah, okay, there was some stimulus in that regard. However, since then we have really bought into this Keynesian economic crap. We have snipped our dollar away from gold. We have created and perpetuated a debt-based economy, and we have run out of room. I don't see a war fixing that. I see a war as a result of that. because this is going to have to be corrected. I mean, the only other thing that I can think of that we can do to stop this economic calamity is force our children into labor. And I don't see that being an option. You know, you started with the one guy, you know, usually the head of the household, the dad, working. And then eventually the wife had to work. And then we started, with, getting rid of our savings and our retirements. And now we're living in debt. The next step is literally forcing our children into labor. And nobody wants to do that. Some already have, truth be told. There are kids that go to work and they give all their money to their parents. And it's sad, but that's where we're at. How are we going to fix this? We have to fix the fundamentals. I just think war is going to be a part of that.
Dave, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
You can go to anamericanwarning.com. Podcasts and articles and stuff like that are available there. Of course, you can find us on YouTube as well. And the podcast is also on iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher and Player FM and so on and so forth. Any of your favorite podcasting sites or applications. So check us out there. And then, of course, the book, you can get it on Amazon.com, Reloaded and American Warning.
David, once again, thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.